coloration coming through the water lens was shifting. So you get these moments of fluorescent purple, for example, just for a couple of minutes, and they disappear again for another 24 hours, because that's about how long it took for the whole cycle to run through. You can see at the bottom of that one in the far ring on the floor, you can see some of that really strong blue starting to come through. So it was doing some really crazy things with the light, and this is once again, I didn't really know how it was going to behave with the light. I had some sense that it was going to do this coloration, but until it was in that space with such controlled lighting and with that height, because the 8-meter height was very hard for me to emulate in my studio, I really didn't have a sense of how much shifting was going to happen through that light. So that was really exciting when that happened. At the same time, I'm just going to flip you back to video. At the same time, I was working on a commission for a small boutique hotel in South Yarra for this light well that when you enter the hotel, you see this sort of corridor with very warm lighting, but quite dark, and at the end of it, this glowing light well. So I made a work that played with the experience of encountering that light well, and also to give a moment of intrigue as you enter the space. So as you entered the space, you could see these pools of light on the floor. There's a small sensor back towards the door that when you walk past, it would activate, which would activate these little paddles in the water, and that would create these swirling motions, but they're quite subtle on the floor. It would only run for a few seconds and then it would stop again. So that, for the sake of the video, we were actively activating it, but usually you wouldn't see it run again. So it meant that people would walk up to get into the lift, and as they got to where the lifts are, just adjacent to the to where the artwork is, the artwork would respond to them. And then you'd look up and see this construction in this beautiful light wells that the architects had designed. So once again, this was really pushing what could happen with using the water as a lens. The amount of water in these vessels doesn't change, so the actual size of the rings on the floor stays the same. But as you can see there, they get this really delicate coloration as the light splits through the water, as well as the action the swirling action as it was activated. I then, going from this idea of having the lights embedded in the forms, I developed the work called Planet, which is actually going to be in the Experimenta exhibition later on this year. And this, I feel, was a real sort of condensing of the ideas that I've been working with in that science gallery work and in the hotel work. A much simpler form of it, but really allowing the viewer to focus on what happens when you push light through water in such a simple way. It's such a basic part of our world, but it really does, it's constantly surprising me what happens when you put light and water together, and that's what keeps driving these works. What you can discover by something. You know, like if you're sitting there having dinner and you see what the lights are doing through your glass of water, it's really amazing that still is something that we don't necessarily notice all the time. This work also has air bubbles blowing into it to activate that space as well. So in terms of where, I'm just going to finish up for a couple of minutes by talking about where I think these explorations might go next, because to a certain extent, this piece I feel is somewhat, I don't think it's the final outcome of this sort of trajectory, but it definitely feels like a real coalescing of what I was looking at with those other works. So two directions that I think my work is probably going to go in relation to light over the next couple of years. Last year, I made this work for a solo show at King's ARI. This work, a couple of years before, I'd done a residency with my husband in Finland, and it was in the middle of winter, and so we only had a few hours of light per day. I was really taken with that and the impact it has on our bodies and on our rhythms, feeling like it's dinner time at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, for example. And so I started developing the idea for a work that would be a giant aperture that would block the light coming in those beautiful front windows at King's, that would then close off the light and open it for the viewer and just slowly take the viewer through that cycle. However, in trying to figure out how to do that, it became a sort of mechanical conundrum. The scale that I wanted it to be at, as you can see, this work is roughly the scale that I was going for. The scale was just too big to try and manage in the space. And so I started looking at other ways of blocking light and came upon this idea of moving salt in and out of a vessel. Once again, what actually happened once the work was running with light behind it was that it was doing things that I never could have preempted. It was getting this beautiful translucent glow coming through the salt. These patterns happening in the salt with different sections of density that are really, you could sort of sit and watch it for hours and see how the salt behaves in different ways, as well as these sort of sharp patterns that were happening in the kind of pictorial plane of that central flat vessel. So though it's not using light in an active way like some of the other works, the use of salt as a barrier to light is, I feel, is going to really, and as a kinetic element in the work, I feel is something that I've still got a lot of, that still needs a lot of consideration. The other piece that I'll just very quickly show you is a commission that we worked on. I'm just going to screen share again. That I did with Jem Freeman a few years ago for a big building down in Docklands for the laneway in the building. And this is very much a work that's about light, but in a really different, using a really different approach. We, with this piece, we wanted to use light as as movement in the work instead of mechanical parts, because the work was of such a scale and had to last for such a long time. And so the idea came to use optic fibre. So this work has 20,000 lengths of optic fibre in it, each connected to an individual LED. Those LEDs are all mapped and individually controllable, essentially, and we feed the work video to animate the sculptural form. The bundles of optic fibre also blow in the wind, so it's got quite a lot going on in terms of movement. But there's definitely, this is something that we're going to be looking into further over the next couple of years, because the capability of using optic fibre and LEDs, at the stage that we did this a few years ago, we could find no instances of those technologies having been brought together in a sculptural way, and so that we feel there's a lot of potential for this, particularly in how to activate and engage big civic spaces that are really tricky to actually activate in a way that, you know, works for long-term sculptural outcomes. So yeah, so those are kind of the two trajectories that I feel light is taking my work in over the next few years. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura, for that wonderful insight into, you know, the broad range of your work. I'd now like to introduce Jason Sims. He's an artist who works in the realm of perceptual art, utilising the properties of light and reflection. He creates simple illusions of space in the form of contemporary sculpture, large-scale installation, and public art, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. Jason has exhibited across Australia and in Hong Kong and the US and Europe, and has recently completed his second major public artwork in Adelaide, South Australia. So please make Jason really welcome.
Got it. I'm just going to do a quick test. Just give me a minute.
Yep, PowerPoint open.
Great.
Yep, looks good.
Cool. Welcome everyone today. Yeah, hope everyone's safe and well out there. I'd firstly like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which I live and work today, the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I guess when asked to do this presentation about light as a sensory or as a sensory experience, yeah, I was obviously happy to do it. When I think about my practice, I sort of don't think about myself so much as a light artist. I kind of, I guess I consider myself more as an artist that plays with perception and I guess plays with space and perspective. Obviously, the very nature of light is that you know, we need light to see things. We need light to bounce off objects and into our eyes to be able to, you know, perceive perspective and see objects. So I kind of, I guess I think of light as a material that I utilize and that helps facilitate the illusions of space and form that I hope to create in my work. Growing up, I was always kind of intrigued that in things that had a sort of sense of wonder, like a lot of children do, I guess. But I was particularly drawn to different kind of objects that had a sense of illusion. And I actually grew up in a house that had an infinity mirror in the bathroom, believe it or not. We had a bathroom that had a kind of a large mirror on both side walls. So every morning I'd go in and I would kind of walk into an infinity box pretty much. And so I used to play with it. I used to love playing with it. I used to kind of wonder kind of how far it would go. I would see all the reflections of myself, and I would kind of try and I'd try and catch my reflections doing something different, as if there were separate beings. And I would kind of wonder if I was just a reflection of the real me, you know, somewhere off in the distance. So maybe it's just a coincidence, but I feel like probably that experience has had something to do with, you know, the work that I make today and the way I kind of interrogate my perception of reality. So I guess I'd like to give a bit of a background into the way my work has developed over the last 10 years or so. So I've been a practicing artist since 2009, predominantly using lights and mirror to create illusions of space in the form of wall works, sculptures, large-scale installations and public art. And so this is just a couple of images from one of my first exhibitions. Just they were objects, I guess, created to just invite contemplation, and I was hoping to create works that were experiential and ultimately had that sense of wonder. And I guess over the years, my work has, I've always sought out these elements in my work, and I'm always exploring how I can make my work more experiential. So I kind of moved into works that used another element of illusion, and that was to suspend something on one of the mirrors. And so it gives this sense that an object is hovering within a space. And that was, I guess, to further create a sort of sense of wonder. And over time, I kind of started exploring different ways I could create compositions with work, and looking at things like having light spilling out of the back of the work, and really creating something that went beyond just what was a box on the wall. It kind of lit the room up and created, work that was, again, more experiential. And so I began playing with color and thinking about how color can kind of affect the experience. It can affect your mood. And, obviously also two colors working together, how that kind of play between those colors work. Also, a feature of my work, or a kind of recurring theme, is this kind of duality. So maybe two different directions. I guess like a sliding doors moment, where this sort of choice of going one way or another, and ultimately being shaped by that choice. And so again, just playing with light, color, shape, to create a sort of immersive experience. And so this sort of, I guess, desire to kind of create work that was more experiential led me into making works that didn't just go on the wall, but works that were sculptural, that were three-dimensional. And so in particular, things that you kind of walk around and experience from sort of different positions. And so I kind of like, by lining the interior edges of an object, I kind of like the idea that the shape of the form determines, the pattern of illusion that appears within. And so kind of early on in making these kind of sculptures, it was always a bit of a surprise to flick the switch and see what unfolded once they'd kind of come together and been kind of constructed. Over the years, I guess through experimentation, I was kind of able to manipulate the space and create sort of different outcomes and different experiences just from all that, I guess, experimentation. I'll just quickly shoot down to a video. Hope everyone can see that. This just gives a bit more of a sense of, I guess, the work when you're moving around it. Maybe you don't get the idea from just a normal image. Yeah, and so over time, I was able to play with not just creating space, but also almost creating forms within.
Hey, Jason, you just have to stop sharing.
Okay. Oh, Okay. Oh. Okay. Okay. Take two. Hope that's okay. Yeah. So again, this is sorry about that, guys. Yeah, I hope that video comes through all right. Like I said, yeah, just through experience, trying to create works that not only offer space, but creating almost objects within. So being able to kind of manipulate that illusion so that you can kind of create three-dimensional forms, if you will. I'll just show you one more. Yeah, so hopefully that gives a little bit more sense of what the work, the sculptural work is, you know, moving around it, just as opposed to just a flat image. Just jumping back to the slides. Yeah, so again, this is an early work that I made that will give a sense of kind of creating objects within. And I'm always and have always been, you know, led by my, I guess, studio experience in that, you know, I'm always experimenting to try and kind of, you know, create new experiences. And you know, I'm always very physically based experimentation. So, you know, setting up mirrors and lights and props to kind of try and, rather than mathematics, which is kind of what people always ask me, am I into mathematics? I'm definitely not. I'm all physically based stuff. So I guess I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about you know, the way I really think I've always been interested in creating kind of large scale works, and so that's kind of in recent years where I've moved towards. And so I'll just have a little bit of a look at that. Oh, another I guess element of my work is thinking about presentation and how the work is presented. Often the work will come on a plinth or a shelf, and so I've really tried to play with that, the presentation element, and again kind of looking at duality and creating maybe an object of the same shape and same size that is presented along with the actual object. So in this case, the light box sits on a shelf, which is actually the same dimensions of the object itself. So what you have is, I guess, a form that offers space, and then another form which I guess consumes space. So I guess moving, yeah, this is just some more work that I've created, you know, trying to get lines of light to kind of pass through that illusionary space. And now moving kind of onto something that I'm very interested in, which is creating large-scale works and public art. And, you know, this is something I've been very lucky or lucky enough to develop in my practice over recent years. And, you know, I think that obviously scale can play a big part in the experiential nature of an object and the way it kind of relates to body. And so rather than it just being something that you could kind of look into and imagine that there's a space beyond, like if it's large enough, you can almost be drawn in and feel like you can step inside. And so also these couple of next couple of works were shown at the Art Gallery of South Australia, and they were a little bit of a step aside or step to the side from what I normally do, still using mirror and light, but kind of creating anamorphic shapes. So having the viewer kind of move around the work and then all of a sudden find a sweet spot and feel like they can look into, look past the light box and look into a mirror and get the sense that there was a three-dimensional object kind of within that mirror. And this is the first public art work that I've ever done. It's kind of an abstract shipping container, funnily enough, containing light. And those side panels are actually just flat, perforated aluminium. And so that was a fun little project just to kind of try to get a sense of depth on those panels just through using perforations. I've also started to move or wanted to kind of create work that not only sat inside a very controlled gallery space in terms of lighting, but also taking something outdoors and creating work that kind of could work with nature and sort of, you know, people could experience the work differently depending on kind of the time of the day. And so there'd be this sense of interaction. And so you can see here's a work that I did in Adelaide. And it's a sort of a large, about almost 5 meters high sculptural work. Similar to, I guess, my studio-based work, but again, it sort of interacts with the light, and you know, at nighttime it becomes, you know, what I've shown you in images before. The object is very, you know, you get a real sense of illusion within, but during the day you get a lovely kind of reflection of passers-by and the kind of hustle and bustle of the city. So the work, I quite like how the work sort of changes depending on, you know, the time of the day, what the weather's like, etc. And so I guess this is one last object which actually utilizes only natural light. I don't have any lighting in here. It's just, yeah, like I said, natural light, mirrored panels, stainless steel panels to kind of create an illusion of an object within. This is at Hayward Park in Unley in South Australia. And I guess the brief was to create a work that was playful and that really celebrated the park. And that was the idea of kind of creating this illusion that people can actually walk up behind and become part of the illusion. And also, you know, the mirrored panels are shaped by kind of what is being reflected all around the back of the work. So I might just jump to a video of that. Have a look at. oops. This is, yeah, so this was a, this work was installed last year. It's called Echo. It was a pretty big project that involved, you can see, concrete retaining wall, shaping a mound, steps at the back. It was, yeah, it was probably the biggest sort of project I've done, I think. And like I said, not using any light, which I think is, or any artificial light, should I say, which is pretty unique for my work, just using natural light and trying to get that sense of illusion, create something that was playful and hopefully, you know, creates, you know, a sense of wonder. Just so moving forward. Sorry. I'll just bring my slideshow back up again. Yeah, I kind of, there's a few things I'd kind of like to work on moving forward. I've interested in kind of using flat works. So moving away a little bit from using reflection and creating this bouncing back and forward, but using flat works. This is this is a flat work that just uses transitioning of lighting to kind of create a sense of depth. So it just sort of, the light shifts from the inside section, which I guess is the appearance of a doorway, to the outside, and it just sort of slowly morphs between sort of drawing people in and hopefully creating a real sense of depth on this flat kind of perspex work. So I'd really like to kind of explore that a lot more moving forward. Also, last year I created a work that was a kinetic work. It was pretty pretty big, scary thing to do, creating work that had lots of different panels of mirror and a whole bunch of fans behind these panels of mirror that would swing back and forward and create this kind of oscillating appearance. And I'll just quickly jump to a video just to give you a sense of what that sort of looked like. Sorry, hopefully this one comes up. Yeah, so this hopefully will give you a bit of a sense of kind of what it looked like. The work is about 5 meters long, and the fan are set on timers, so they kind of move between kind of slow movements into more kind of fast movements, much like that one. Yeah, so I'd like to do kind of a little bit more of that stuff where there is some sort of movement within the work. So not just kind of light changing, but also a bit of actual kinetic movement. just jump back to the last couple of slides. So at the moment, I've got a show on at Mars Gallery, and I'll just show you a few of those works. Unfortunately, you can't, well, you can only see the work by appointment. This is the first work. You can only see the work by appointment because of the lockdowns, current lockdowns, but you can actually go to the Mars Gallery website to check out a virtual tour, which is quite cool. So I'll just show you a couple of works from the show. So this work just has a nice kind of subtle change and has a beautiful kind of depth to the work, which I'm hoping to kind of work on a little bit more. And again, it's a paneled work, which is actually not a kinetic work. It's a fixed panel work, and just trying to create different patterns within the work, and hopefully, create different kind of experiences for people. So thanks very much. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Jason. If you stay on just for a minute, and Laura, if you
Sure.
can join us, because we're almost out of time. There's a question that's come up for you, Jason, just about the question has been struck by the quality of the nodes in your work and how integral they are to the illusory stretching into space. Is the use of nodes in your work something you've focused on, or has it just evolved in relation?
The use of, so what was that? The use of
nodes.
What do you mean? Like, I'm not.
Well, this was a question from Laura. So, Laura, I'm going to.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool.
Nodes is the kind of connection points between the lights. So,
okay,
as in those, like node points in like a train network, for example, or the stations. But in your work, it seems like a big part of that stretch into space, I guess. I was just wondering whether you, Yeah,
I mean, I guess, so the work has, I'm always, like, a lot of people use LEDs in their work, and you see a lot of kind of infinity work with kind of LED strips, and I'm very, I don't like to see that. I like to see a nice, crisp, clean line, and so I always have my work behind opal kind of perspex, or it sits in a kind of housing or a profile. And then, those points, I just usually create caps that sit over those junction points, which I think kind of works well. It almost highlights and makes more of a feature of those points that come together. Yeah,
definitely.
And Andy has written in just to say, remind people and remind everyone that might be able to walk past the windows of Mars Gallery, that actually the show, you can see a lot, through the window.
You can, yeah. It's got a beautiful big window there at Mars Gallery, and there's nothing stopping people from coming and looking through the window. Yeah.
And Laura, I had a question to you. Jason talked about that, his parents and the infinity mirror has a lot to answer for in terms of his practice. But I'm curious about where you got inspired, particularly about mechanical and kinetic and all of that. What sort of drew you to that kind of practice?
I think it was actually, so my very early work through undergrad and that sort of thing was quite figurative, and I was always really interested in the body and the particularly touch and those kind of touch and sort of bodily experiences. And my interest in kinetics was actually to do with that, to do with how our bodies respond to movement, and why we particularly when I did my PhD, a lot of it was looking at how can we have an emotional response to something that's purely a machine. For example, what's that kick we feel when we see something move before we realize that it's not alive, and things like that. So I think that's actually, it came from that very early figurative work in a way. And though the work is not in any way figurative anymore, it still feels like that's its core for me often.
So
yeah.
is the interest then in the why you're particularly interested in the mechanical as opposed to the digital, given that can, that could tell you something very different in
yeah, I think there's a few elements to that. So there's the the mechanical to me is I just get excited trying to figure things out and work out how to make something work. So there's definitely that element of it. There's also the wanting everything to be visible and honest to the viewer. So it's very unusual in my work for anything to be covered up, for example. So you can actually, if you understand systems a little bit to a certain extent, you can figure out what is going on through viewing the work, as opposed to, I think what can happen with digital works is there's an assumption that there's something else going on that's separate to what you can see and perceive and understand. And in some ways that actually, even if that's not the case, even if everything's self-evident, I think viewers react in a different way. So there's definitely that sense of wanting to put it all out there so that when there is then this unexpected response from a viewer, it's not because there's a sort of a ghost in the system or something. It's like so that's kind of
It takes it out of a bit of the kind of magical thinking of the digital world.
It's more about how different things can behave and have behavior in our world, and not necessarily be human to have that, or animal, or that sort of thing. So
hey, look, we're right out of time, but thank you so much to both of you for presenting on your work. Both extraordinary practices, and look forward to seeing, further work from you both. I think there's a whole range of things that we could talk about. I'm curious about the difference between doing the big public artwork and the gallery work and stuff, but that will need to be for another time. So thank you again, Jason and Laura, for joining us today.